All right, we are back for the 15th episode of Talkin Talent. We took a month off in March, but are happy to be back with a fun episode for you. In this episode, I chat with my friend Tori Mitchell, who is a peer of mine in the industry. Tori has spent her entire career in the recruiting and search world, mostly working directly in the human resources space. So we dive into the good, the bad, and the ugly of HR recruiting and what's ahead. Hope you enjoy the episode. All right, everyone, we are back for the 15th episode of Talkin Talent. We had a month off in March, a lot of things going on internally here at Cordia, but I have some fun episodes coming up in the next few months. I think a few that'll highlight some of my colleagues who are going to be joining on the accounting and finance side of our business and some topics outside of HR. So looking forward to that. Again, if you enjoy this episode, love if you tell your friends and coworkers about it, anyone who can appreciate good conversation about people and talent and what's going on in the human resources world. And remember, you can subscribe on Spotify. You can get it on our website or the Cherry Bekaert website. Doing something a little bit different today that I am excited about. I'm going to be talking with someone who is a peer of mine in the industry and who brings a wealth of knowledge in recruiting, executive search in the HR space, although she does a lot of other things as well. So Tori Mitchell, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Thank you for joining me. And I really shouldn't call you a peer. You have almost 3 times as much experience than I do in this world. You spent your entire 12-year career with Juno Search Partners, and Juno's based out of Philadelphia. Tori now lives in South Carolina, so we'll get into that a little bit. Would love just quickly at a very macro level to tell us about your journey through recruiting and with Juno.
Yeah. So I've been with Juno for my entire career so far, started about 12 years ago. I was lucky enough that they hired me right out of college, and I was actually their very first employee. So it was just me and the 2 partners, Michael and Vicky, when I started, and they had started Juno solely focused on HR and administrative staffing. So that's really where I cut my teeth in recruitment. So over the years, I've really just taken on more and more responsibility with Juno, have always done full life cycle recruitment for them in HR and admin space, but have over the probably past 8 to 10 years been focused solely on HR, and have been focusing more on leadership roles as of the last 5 years. And Juno itself has grown tremendously during those 12 years as well. Like I said, it was the 3 of us when we started, and then we grew to about 90, 95 employees in 2021, and then are leveling out now, probably closer to around 50. As you know, the pandemic time period was wild for recruitment. So we had a lot of big projects that we were supporting, but I think we'll probably stay in this size now for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, that's a good sweet spot. I think we've kind of fluctuated in between 40 and 50 on the Cordia Resources side. And so I like to tell clients that we're not a tiny little boutique firm where, we're there's, 1 or 2 of us, but we're also not a large, firm that just does staffing or is more transactional. So I think that's a good number. Wow. I mean, I think getting up to 100, that's obviously COVID had there were good and bad things about COVID. There was some swings up and down the past 4 years. The 2020 was interesting. 21 and 22 were crazy. Last year there was a little bit of a dip, and I think I'm pretty bullish and pretty positive about this year. But thank you for sharing that with us. One thing I ask everybody who comes on here, as I've talked about many times, and kind of one of my first jobs, or what I had what I did when I was younger, in high school, even before I went to college. Um, what is when you were growing up and you had a job, something that you did, whether it was part-time or something you did in college, was there any correlation? Was there any idea that you would be getting into something like this when you had that first job you had when you were younger?
No, not at all. At least not really that I can see now. But I worked a lot in the hospitality industry during high school and college. I was a server and a bartender. My very first job ever, I was like 14 and I was a busser at a restaurant. Then I worked at a hot dog stand for a while, which was
Wow.
unique. And then yeah, went on to serve in sports bars and bartend and things. And then in college, I had a work study program that I did where I was like a receptionist for the theater and dance department, which is like not something that I ever had any interest in doing. I'm not like a theater and dance person, but it was an interesting role. So can't really say any of that correlates into what I do now, I guess, other than learning how to talk to people and how to have those conversations and just learn more about people. I think that correlates to recruiting and what I do now, but other than that, I can't really say there's much there.
Yeah, I mean, there's no substitute for learning how to deal with people and personalities, and that not everyone's the same, and it's not always a one size fits all experience. I've, you are one of a number of people who shared that's had those kinds of jobs growing up. I never really did. I kind of had retail. I never got into, which is there are some similarities there, but I wish I had some experience in hospitality and in restaurants or a bar or something like that. I think it's really easy to tell who's good in jobs like that and who really enjoys it and can make the most out of it and who isn't. And yeah, but there's no better way to get a read on people than to have a job like that.
Yeah. And now that I think about it, honestly, I think it also developed my customer service skills. So, how I interact with my clients on a daily basis, too, and just how to ensure that I'm keeping them happy and satisfied with the work that we're doing. So, I guess there is some correlation. I just never really got involved in like the actual hiring part of those jobs. But I think just learning how to deal with people, it taught me a lot.
Well, we want to transition into um, talking about what the job market looks like right now. And for those listening, remember, we're coming to this mostly from a human resources slant, although, Tori's been working, on things that are a little more diverse now outside of that. But her, most of her background, as you know, is in that, and that is specifically what I do. So as it pertains to human resources, people, talent acquisition, everything in that space, what's going on? Now that we've settled, we're what, almost 4 years, 4+ years past the first day of COVID. As I mentioned, a lot of swings up and down in the market. What are we hearing from candidates and clients?
Yeah. It's sort of like a tricky market right now. I feel like there are a lot of opportunities out there that I'm seeing in the HR space. But there's still a lot of HR folks on the market who have been laid off or impacted by rifts or whatever it may be. So it's an interesting market for sure. But I feel like I'm seeing a lot of HR leadership opportunities and maybe less of some of the more entry level or lower level HR opportunities. And I think for the HR function, talent acquisition has been the most impacted over the past year. My LinkedIn is filled with recruiters who are on the market looking for opportunities. And, whenever I see a recruitment position posted, there's hundreds of applicants within hours. So I know
Yep.
it's a really competitive market. So it's sort of tough to describe the market currently because I feel like in one breath it's a decent market. There's lots of opportunity out there, but then in the same breath, there's still a lot of folks who are looking for work.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, 100% on the talent acquisition. Um, market. I definitely feel for all the all the talent acquisition professionals who, a lot of them who've been in whether you have a couple years of experience or whether you have 10, 15, 20 years and you've been in leadership roles. The big overcorrection, I think, in the last 12 to 18 months. And, companies overhired a lot of people, and whether they thought that at the time or not, they realized that they wasn't sustainable to keep all of them. Yeah, and really tough too, because a lot of them were hired able to be fully remote at the time because they needed recruiters so badly. And now that we've shifted back into more of a hybrid model, although it's more likely for recruiters to be able to be fully remote, I still, now if you moved and you live somewhere where there aren't as many jobs in your physical location, it's even more challenging. So yeah, I mean, do you see that coming back at all? Are there recruiting jobs that, again, I don't see a lot of them posted either. So I feel for it, but do you see them coming back at any point or in any industry?
Um, yeah, I do a little bit. My team here at Juno, we've worked on three high-level talent acquisition roles. And when I say high level, I'm saying director level. So, 10 plus years of experience. Which is pretty good. Given the market, I'm actually surprised that we've had these three high-level recruitment roles over the past 2 or 3 months. And they've honestly been sort of challenging to fill because there are so many candidates out there. It's a lot of screening and a lot of interview to find the right person. And I will say that even though they're recruitment roles, they were on-site positions. We have one that's remote currently, but one that we just wrapped up last week was a fully on-site role. And a lot of recruiters think that because they're in recruiting, they should be able to work remotely. So it was challenging. It was a challenging role for that reason in particular.
Yeah, that's a great point. And the the there's still a necessity, I think, for leaders who are hiring a director, VP level talent acquisition. Even if there are a lot of people on the market, that doesn't mean that if you are a chief people officer, or maybe it's a TA person reporting to a COO or a CFO, something like that, you still, just because there's all those people on the market doesn't mean that it's easy to go find them yourself. Or if you're posting a job that the right people are going to apply to, and even if the right people do apply to it, as you mentioned, there's hundreds and hundreds of applications trying to sift through that, which is kind of what I would, I'm sure you do as well. Try to, when I talk with clients and they're asking about, kind of need this role, I wonder what level it should be, I wonder what the title should be, what background should they have, and these people don't have time to be sifting through hundreds and hundreds of applicants and figuring out the right, just takes forever. So even though there's all these people on the market, companies still don't, some people do it well, or they're vulnerable enough to, I think, know what they don't do well, but it is so hard. It can take so long if you're trying to do this on your own.
I would almost argue that in a market like this, it's harder.
Yeah.
Because it's a lot of work. I think sometimes people forget how much work goes into recruitment. It is absolutely a full-time job. When I speak to some of these HR leaders who also have to own talent acquisition, I feel for them because that is a full-time job in and of itself. And then they have all these other HR responsibilities that they have to do on top of that.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of work. I mean, if you think about all of the candidates you'd have to interview, phone screen, and then invite in to interview, and then, get through the process. It's a lot. I could fill my whole day with just phone interviews for one job.
Yep.
Imagine if you had, if you were an HR leader who was working on 5 open positions at one time, for example, like that, they just wouldn't have time to get all of their job done.
Yeah. And just knowing the right questions to ask, digging into things that may not be, for candidates who don't exactly have things on their resume that you have in your job description. But that's a great point. I agree. It is probably it is probably harder. I like how you describe that, and I do think companies have more or they think they have more leverage now when it comes to the market, where, a couple years ago it was so busy and companies were growing, whether you were growing or you were filling roles, that were replacement roles, was moving so quickly. The offers that were out there were, some of them were way above market. People were getting counter offers, and then the company was coming back with another offer. I mean, there were offers we were getting at 20, 30, 40,000 above what the company wanted to pay. And I think they have more leverage now. They're still willing to be flexible, but I don't know if you've seen this, but it just slowed down a little bit in regards to the feedback, and that they're vetting out maybe more internal referrals, or there's just other things in play, as opposed to a few years ago when it was going so quickly that, and maybe too quickly, honestly. I think we're in a good place now where there's some back and forth, but there is more leverage. They're less willing, I think, to go way above and beyond with pay or benefits, sign-on bonuses, things like that.
Yeah, I think that actually plays into what we were talking about earlier, where companies were overhiring. I feel like the market was so wild in 2021 and 2022 that companies were hiring candidates because they felt like they almost had to. Like, candidates were going off the market so quickly that they were making decisions faster than they would have normally, and maybe weren't vetting candidates the same way that they had in the past. And so we're hiring folks quicker than they had. And, over the last year, maybe I've realized those weren't the right candidates for them, or maybe it wasn't the right fit for what they needed at the time, but they were just trying to keep up with the market. And in the end, wasn't the right solution for what they were looking for at that time.
Yeah. Um, what do you think the rest of the year has in store, the next 12 months, in terms of positions that you see the most of, that you're working on the most? What different spaces within HR? What does that look like for you right now?
Yeah, for some reason, we are seeing a huge uptick in total rewards positions. I would say, like, 5 to 8 years ago, we would see a lot of benefits roles or compensation roles. Rarely were they combined, comp and ben. Now we're seeing a lot of comp and ben manager roles, or total rewards, which can encompass payroll and HR systems, for example. So we're seeing a lot of that right now. I don't know if it's the time of year, and now that open enrollment is done, they're ready to find, a new leader in that space, or they're combining responsibilities into one bigger role, to make it more attractive for candidates, things like that. But we're seeing a lot of total rewards. We've seen quite a few payroll positions recently as well. And then generalist positions, so like HR director, HR manager,
Yeah.
handling all aspects of HR, but more of those generalist type roles. Whereas in 2021 and 2022, we saw a lot of diversity and inclusion roles, specifically like specialized in that area of HR. And now I'm seeing it sort of go back to where it's part of an HR role. It's not the only thing someone's doing, but it's like becoming part of their responsibilities.
Yeah. I agree with you on the total rewards part of it, across the board, all kinds of different positions. I mean, if you're really good in compensation right now, and you really enjoy it, and you can also manage people, you can almost name your price some of these roles. I mean, they can't keep the right people. I feel, these candidates that we reach out to, and on LinkedIn Recruiter, and you reached out to them, and they're like, you're like the, eighth person who's maybe reached out to me about a role in the like they're just fending people off. So it's crazy. I agree with the DE and I roles. I've seen some of them now lumped in with like learning and development, but then they also have some DE and I responsibilities. I think companies they did the right thing and added those positions, but depending on the size of your organization and your budget, you just, unfortunately, it's the first thing that goes sometimes too, when companies have to cut positions. Yeah, and I think the other one, I would add, for at least specific to us, or just the generalist roles, but specifically positions that are newly created, like director, senior director, VP level roles, where you're either the first hire in a, let's say, small to mid-sized company, 100 to 200, 300, somewhere within that range, where they've had some HR support, they've had administrative support, but they've never had someone who really has been at the, has been at the table, understands the business, is a really, really excellent communicator, and you just need a higher level person. So those are the most fun ones, I think, to work on, or you get to kind of be very consultative through the process and talk about those. And they're really, as you know, a lot of candidates interested in roles like that too. There are a lot who aren't. There are a lot of people who don't. It can be a little overwhelming to jump into something that's brand new like that, but have had a lot of those as well.
Yeah. Yeah, we've seen a lot of those as well. It's probably a sweet spot of ours. And with roles like that, one of the first questions candidates usually ask me is the leadership team bought in? Do they actually want an HR leader who is going to have a seat at the table and maybe challenge them on things they haven't been challenged on before? And they're challenge their thought processes and their internal processes and how they're doing things from an HR and people perspective. Because a lot of times companies will say they want that person, and then that person gets in there, and then they're like, oh, this person wants more than we can give them at this point, or they're trying to change the way we're doing things too significantly.
Yeah.
So I've seen that a lot too, and that's always the first question I get is leadership bought in? Does the CEO want HR?
Well, that's perfect segue into my next question, where, one of the things that I think about a lot, and I talk to, company leaders about all the time, is when they're hiring for positions like that, what, you know, what are you seeing? What kinds of either mistakes, or that might even be too harsh of a word, but what kind of challenges slash mistakes have you seen organizations make when they're hiring somebody like that, when they're hiring, or whether it's a newly created role or they're reorganizing and bumping up the role to a new title? What are some of those challenges that those companies have when they're bringing people in to those positions?
Yeah, great question. And I see this a lot, honestly. I think one of the big challenges I see or mistakes I see companies making is hiring someone who has maybe been more strategic in the past, and they're hiring for that future growth, right? Like maybe it's a company who is rapidly growing and they're at 150 employees today, but they're going to be 350 in the next year. And they need to hire someone today to do a lot of this growth, and help with the growth and put in sustainable and scalable processes and functions, but then also can be that strategic leader in the future. And it can be tough to find that person who can be that strategic leader, but also that player coach sort of tactical person in the meantime. It's hard to find those skills, but it's also hard to find someone who wants to do that. Because typically, if they've gotten to a certain point in their career where they are a more of a strategic leader, it can be hard to go backwards and then go back to being a team of one where you're doing everything by yourself in the beginning, and then can grow your team, as time goes on. So sometimes they hire folks for the future that can't necessarily do the things that they need done today, or vice versa. They hire someone who can do the things today, but can't or aren't able to be that sort of strategic visionary leader in the future.
Yeah. You said it so well. I agree. I think a lot of it is, I have conversations with leaders who get very hung up on titles and get very hung up on they have a conversation with someone, a friend of theirs was a similar job in another company, tells them a story about somebody they hired or met somebody, and the title was, I met this great chief people officer. I'd love to hire somebody like that. But you're a 75-person company, and you don't have the people that you could call somebody who's maybe an HR director level candidate and give them that title, very, very inflated title, but it doesn't necessarily, it might look good on your website, and on your front page, or to be able to talk about that. But you're not necessarily doing the candidate any favors you're trying to bring in, and you're also not doing yourself any favors. But you're right, it is a sweet spot between being in the weeds and in the minutia, and like really getting excited about cleaning things up or building something new. And it's a lot of work at the beginning. And then ideally, you get into a place where it's in good hands, and you might only be there for 2 years, 3 years, and then they either might not need you anymore. And then you can pass that role off to somebody else, and then you move on. But yeah, I can really tell there's certain companies and leaders that are more vulnerable and really open to hearing. And not that I know everything or you know everything, but at least you base it off historical, our history and what we see out there, since we talk to so many people. So I love to have when people are really vulnerable or want to hear about a situation that's happened in the past and be able to tell that story. Those are some of my favorite conversations, as opposed to, here's this job description, we put it together, we have to have these things, and there's just no wiggle room at all.
Yeah.
And in terms of, or what have you seen like the last year in terms of roles that you're hiring for, that that the company's replacing somebody who left, or roles that are new because of growth? Like, do you have a number in your head of a split on what that looks like? Putting you on
Honestly,
the spot a bit, but
yeah, no. Honestly, I would say it's 50-50, really. Um, there have been quite a few scenarios where it's a replacement, someone left for another opportunity, or maybe the company was asking them to go back in person 5 days a week and they got an opportunity that's remote. Like, I hear that a lot of why people are leaving organizations. But I've also worked on a handful of newly created roles over the past couple of months. So I really think it's 50-50, and depends on the industry. I've seen a big uptick and a lot of growth in like the life sciences and biotech space recently. And then, I think tech and SaaS has maybe slowed down a little bit. Although not every tech and SaaS company. I'm working with a SaaS company now that's rapidly growing. So I think it just depends, but I would say it's still a mix.
yeah, I think 50-50 is probably, I think that's probably about right. And maybe it's now, compared to a few years ago, maybe 2/3 are backfilling, and a third are new positions. But sometimes the role is either downgraded or upgraded from the person who left. So whether it's someone who'd been there for 10 years and they're changing the position because they realize that they have the opportunity to do so now, or and they're taking somebody who was extended to a certain level, but they don't need someone there anymore, or the opposite, where someone leaves and they realize it's time for us to change this title and bring in somebody who's more experienced. So there's a lot of that. Again, I really enjoy those conversations and being able to provide some kind of context or share. And everything comes with a price, right? I mean, you get what you pay for. What do you feel? Do you feel like, I'm trying to think of my conversations recently with, I feel like I'm having less conversations now um, with, and I guess anyone in HR across the whole space. A lot of it is not a lot. I have a lot less conversations now about people wanting to move on because they don't think they're paid fairly, or they're not compensated fairly compared to the market. A lot of it has more to do with culture, maybe the person they're reporting to, just the general team. Company is in financial stress. I just don't hear. So I guess that's a good sign. I know that HR professionals should be paid more. I think it got better in the first few years of COVID. I hope it stays that way. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I would say I would agree with that. I rarely have conversations with folks who are looking, that are looking solely for monetary reasons. I don't hear a lot that they feel like they're underpaid. So I definitely think that has improved over the last couple of years. Salary ranges now are not as wild as they were in 2021, 2022, but I think they're where they should be.
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned early, the podcast, you um, were in Philadelphia for a number of years. Juno's based, I guess it's still based out of Philadelphia, right? I mean, there's still an office. Is there? I think you got rid of your office, though. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, it's a funny timing that we're having this conversation. Tomorrow is the last day of our office lease,
Oh, wow.
so, which is a big milestone for Juno because if you would have asked me 5 years ago if I thought we would ever be a remote first organization, I would have said absolutely not. Um, we loved being in the office. We were in the office 5 days a week. Uh, COVID changed that for us, and we found that a lot of our employees enjoyed working from home more than they thought they would. And a lot of us have young families, so that flexibility is really important to us. And we are finding that even though we could go back into the office, a lot of us weren't going back into the office. So we decided to end our office lease and we are going to have a budget for co-working spaces now for the teams that want to get together a couple times a month, things like that. We're planning a lot more team building events now. We have a pickleball tournament in May coming up that we're going to do. So it's been a crazy ride, but we're really excited about the future. And I had the opportunity to move down here to South Carolina to be closer to my family. I still have a lot of clients in the Philadelphia space, in the Philadelphia area. I have clients all across the country, and I can do my job from here, the same way I was doing it in Philadelphia.
Well, I was going to ask you about that. That was going to lead me into our last kind of small topic was we discussed, networking a little bit and whether that can mean a lot of different things. There are professionals, and sure you and I both tell people if they're not working or they're looking for a job that putting yourself out there, networking, going and, being uncomfortable, talking about yourself in a group of people that you may not know. When as you mentioned 5 years ago, the only way anybody ever did that was in person, right? There was no like, let's get on a Zoom in May 2020 when COVID's been around for 2 months and we're going to do a virtual happy hour. We were like, what are you talking about? That doesn't make any sense. But it sounds like Juno's adapted to that really well because everyone was doing that for the first 3 to 6 months of COVID, and then some companies are like, well, we can't. We can't do this anymore. We're like rushing to get back to the office. We're kind of a mix of both. We're pretty hybrid, and we have employees who live outside the Washington D.C. area, but there's definitely more of an in-person vibe in terms of events that we do and things that we put on where we like to be in front of people in person. But I'm curious how it kind of trended the last couple years, where either you personally and Juno as a whole felt more comfortable being able to do that and felt like you could stay in front of your clients in the same way, even if you weren't seeing them in person.
I feel like I see my clients more now than I ever did because now everything is so virtual and so video heavy that I see my clients for a weekly call via video, whereas previously before COVID, it would just have been a call, right? Maybe I would have done the first initial meeting in person on site at their office. But then after that, everything would have been a call, right? Now it's like we do our initial meeting with the client, and then every follow-up meeting is a virtual meeting. So I'm almost seeing them more, which is like weird to say and think about, but I do feel like I'm getting more FaceTime with them than I ever had. I still love attending in-person networking events. I've gotten very involved in Charlotte SHRM down here. I'm on the board, so I still attend a lot of networking events in person, and I'm going to Philadelphia next month. And I'm going to attend the HR Person of the Year Awards dinner. And so I still think it's very valuable to go to in-person events. I think it's great for networking. There's nothing like it, like being able to see your colleagues and your clients and your candidates in person. There's nothing like it. Can't beat it. But I think there's still something to be said for virtual events as well.
Yeah, no, very well said. I agree. I know I go back and forth all the time. If I had to be in the office and be in person every single day or be remote every single day because we didn't have an office. I still struggle with that because although I do like the flexibility of being at home, I'm home today. I'll be in an office tomorrow. It's tough because although I at the risk of sounding like like you know I guess making a very archaic comment, I do think it is necessary, I think, just for us as people in general, whether it's you and I or anybody else, to like go see other people out in the world. But there's no doubt that a majority of people are much more productive at home, and with the flexibility that brings to you and your family. I mean, there's no substitute for that. So I get, I see both sides of it. And I think, I don't know. I mean, yes, there are fully remote roles we work on, and there are very few positions that are fully in the office. We've worked on some higher level, like executive assistant, chief of staff type roles recently that are fully in the office, but most of the things are 2 or 3 days. So it's I don't know if that's where things are going to stay. I don't know if a year from now that's going to be the case, but I joke around with my wife about moving further south or moving out of DC at some point. Right now, I don't think I can pull that off, but let's hope that at some point I can make that work.
Yeah. Come down to the South. We'd love to have you.
Oh, we were just talking about you have cicadas all over your yard, though.
Yes. Yeah, we're being attacked by the cicadas right now. It's true.
Oh my gosh. Well, we had that here last year. I hadn't seen them since I was growing up, and I was much younger living in Pennsylvania. And I don't understand. I don't understand how scientists are so smart to know exactly to the year, almost to the date, when they're going to come out of the ground. It's wild. That's way above my pay grade.
Yeah, same.
All right. Well, we're going to end it there. Thank you for joining me. Maybe we do this again next year at the same time and see if any of the things we talked about were accurate, or we'll do a follow-up and see how things are going.
Yeah, I'd love that. Almost like a time capsule. Let's see how it plays out.
Exactly. Well, enjoy the rest of your day, Tori. Thank you again.
Thank you. It was great.